Hello, everybody. It's Mike Ferguson here. Welcome to my first attempt ever to create YouTube content, Providence now and then. I wanted to do something simple, talk about an area in Providence, a spot really that I really enjoy and that I think is great, but that is surrounded by one of my least favorite parts of Providence. So I thought that sort of contrast, that dichotomy there would be interesting to my friends who are familiar with Providence. So I wanted to talk about it. Thought I'd do a really simple, rudimentary um, video. And as I started going, I fell down a rabbit hole. Of course, it's never as easy as you expect. And so here we are. So I'm going to talk about this spot, but to do that, I have to talk about some other things, of course. I picked this as image to start out with because this is Westminster Street in Providence, and over the sailor's shoulder you see the Tilden Thurber building. That's where I work or worked before uh, quarantine. So you see the sailor there, and then you see a shot that I took the same from relatively the same spot. Things don't look the same, and the reason they don't look the same has to do with sort of the topic of this little video that I'm trying to do here. You can see the street is narrower now than it was in the 50s when the sailor was lighting his cigarette there. That's part of the reason for that is because that street for about 20 years through the 70s and the 80s was closed down. It was completely shut down. It was turned into a pedestrian mall. Um, and uh, the redevelopment, urban renewal projects that were behind turning that street into a pedestrian mall were part of the same thing that led to the area of, or the spot, and better, of Providence that I really like. It was part of the same thing. So anyway, let's go see what happens. So this is it. This is the beginning of the story, I guess, is the Cathedral of St. Peter and St. Paul in Providence. Catholic Cathedral was let's see, I think it was the cornerstone was laid in 1878, and about 10 years later, it was finally opened. It was used for some ceremonies and things before that, but about 10 years later, it opened up and super popular when Mayor uh, Cianci died in 2016. Former Mayor Cianci, look him up. This is where his sort of memorial service was held. So, and just one of the first large Catholic churches, and not the first Catholic church in Rhode Island, but the first very large Catholic church. It was sold by the Mathewson family, who owned lots of land in the area. When they found out that a Catholic church was going to be built, they came and offered more money to buy the land back, just sort of the prejudice at the time. But the diocese didn't agree, and they built this church. Well, eventually they built another church first. For 40 years that church was there, and now then they built this one. And this is sort of a photograph from the same point of view. It seems like the artist may have used this photo. But you see here it's called Cathedral Square. So the area around the church was known as Cathedral Square from that point after the church was finished, where Westminster Street and Wabasset Street met. Wabasset Street sort of at the time it was like a bow and arrow. It curved. It started at Westminster and Turk's Head, and then bowed out, and then met Westminster again right here at Cathedral Square. And that's Mayor Doyle, sort of a mayor of Providence from the 1800s, 16 years I think he was mayor. He himself did a lot of what would have been considered urban redevelopment, upgrades to infrastructure and whatnot. And his not long after the church was finished, his statue was erected there. This is what it looks like today. When I was walking to work every day, and I walk past this every single day, And usually at some point when I was near the church, one way or the other, um, the bells would go off for 7 a.m. It's been a while. I missed that walk, missed those bells. Here's another view. So this is looking east, and you can see off to the right is Wabassett. To the left is Westminster. Here's the cathedral. There's Mayor Doyle. Those trolley tracks right there run east to west, and if you took them out west over my shoulder, eventually you'd end up in my neighborhood. And this, when this photo was taken, you would take that trolley out to watch a baseball game, the Providence Grays, whose stadium was just a few blocks from my house. And when there were baseball games, they had a set of tracks that would shoot off and head down right to the baseball stadium. There's the same view, so basically just a slight adjustment. So I like this because you're looking down Westminster on the left there, and you see the steeple out there. That's Grace Church. That's right across the street from the Tilden Thurber building where I work. And that picture of the sailor that we saw earlier, the sailor would have been standing right in front of that church. This is same place, Cathedral Square, but now we're looking east, so toward my house, toward the baseball stadium, about a mile away. And you can't tell here, but you could tell in the last slide a little better that there's quite a hill. The Cathedral Square was built on Wabassett Hill. At one time it was called Christian Hill. And today, when you go from, well, let's say from Grace Church or Tilden Thurber, when you go up to the top of Cathedral Square, you have to go up 42 steps. So the hill, it's still there. Now it's just steps. So in the early 60s, in the 50s and 60s, urban renewal was a thing. The population was moving out of Providence into the suburbs. So urban renewal was a hot topic, and Providence decided they needed to do something, and they hired someone who is easily one of the greatest architects of the 20th century, I.M. Pei. Even if you're not a modernist and you don't appreciate that sort of aesthetic or intent, I.M. Pei is numbered by most people, I think, among the best and certainly among the most prolific. But in the top here, those top three buildings or properties you see, those are properties that he was designing around the same time that he was hired by the city of Providence to create a redevelopment plan, and specifically related to Cathedral Square. So I think to my eyes, you see some repetition there. It's not until 1967 in this second row here where you start to see sort of a break from that, and he's designing a research institute. Eventually, later in his career, he designed the pyramid entry to the Louvre in Paris. And down the bottom right, I don't know if it's bottom right for you, or bottom left. For me, it's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So Providence hires I.M. Pei. And at the time, he had this very sort of Corbusier idea about deconstructing or demolishing the past to make room for the future. And so his plans, which almost very little of which was actually executed, involved a lot of demolishing of buildings around Cathedral Square. The demolishing part happened. The rebuilding part, not so much. The rebuilding part that did happen was the Cathedral Square, or the property around the cathedral, right out in front of the cathedral, basically. So I.M. Pei. Some cool buildings, some not my favorite. This actually is his vision for Cathedral Square. Um, this is what he envisioned. So, or in part at least, it was a expansive plan, um, very comprehensive. Very little of it got done. But if you look off across from the cathedral and you see the trees, the steps up, and the trees there, that actually more or less happened. And the steps down into sort of the plaza, those things actually happened. And even the buildings on the other side of the plaza happened in a way. You see the Superman building in the back, and you even can see the steeple for Grace there in the distance. And here it is. This is what it. This was the execution. This is what happened. This is more or less Cathedral Square today in the winter. And this, in the foreground, these trees and this little sort of outdoor room is actually one of my favorite spots in Providence. But it's right next to and surrounded by my least favorite spot, one of my least favorite spots in Providence. Now here is Cathedral Square before some of the apartment buildings that now surround it had been put up, but while the concept that IMP had originally put to paper is sort of being realized. And you see off to the left, my left, the trees and the steps. That's our little outdoor room from the previous slide. That's still there, but the sort of avenue or this plaza changed pretty significantly over the years. Now here it is when they're starting the elevation we talked about earlier, the 42 steps. We see the steps now going in. Today, a lot of this is, I think it's fair to say sort of in ruins. I mean, it's still there, but it's falling apart. Everything you can see in this picture is more or less falling apart. Poor construction, it seems to me. I don't know how to explain it. Now here's another view. You can see our outdoor room, which is, one of my favorite parts of Providence, even today. And in this picture, I think it looks great. I really like it. That fountain no longer works today. We'll see in a minute. It hasn't worked for a very long time, and the public art has been gone for a long, long time. And then you'll see there's new buildings. But what this did was close off Westminster, the street. It no longer goes through. It's closed off now. Another view looking back down Westminster, you see the Steeple of Grace, you see the Superman building. What you don't see here that happened later were the apartment buildings that take up a bunch of the space. Now you see sort of the construction happening. And you can just see off in the distance, you see Grace Church, and then just past it you can see a little corner of Tilburn Thurber. I sort of can't get enough of the pictures. I walked past this fountain every day until March of last year, and it's dead. I mean, it hasn't worked for years. So I can't get enough of these pictures where the fountain's actually working. But again, there's no apartment buildings crowding up the space yet. And now this is it today. You can see that the cathedral is undergoing some reconstruction, refurb, rehab, whatever. So that's what you see over there, the scaffolding. These apartments that you see, these brick apartments, that tedious sort of brick is you didn't see in the previous pictures. And then you just sort of see what I call the ruins. I mean, they come in and they do utility work and they don't replace the tiles. The boarded up windows, those are just, within the last few weeks. That's due to protests that have been happening locally. Um, some of the buildings decide to board up their windows. But this is the part of Cathedral Square that this is one of my least favorite parts of the city. And yet right next to it is one of my favorite spots. And that's the outdoor room that we saw earlier in a few different photos. And I like it even now much more than I did in the older photos. With the age on it and the growth in the trees, the symmetry. I love the 25 trees. We've lost 2 of them at some point, so there should be 25. There's 23. But I just love the spot. I'm not a big symmetry person, and it's generally I tend to gravitate towards asymmetry, but this I love, and I think just in the fall it's extra special. Here it is again, and I like this picture because for all the talk of symmetry, the lamppost here is off center. There was no reason that I can tell that they couldn't put it in the center, but it's not in the center, and it's sort of endearing. The building in the background is the building that cut off Westminster from going all the way through. Just a little detail here. I don't know if these are meant to be ashtrays. I suppose, given when the square was finished in 1972, they probably were meant to be ashtrays. Again, just there's a trash can in each of the 4 corners. These little benches repeat. Again, there's something that's an anomaly. Is this tall ashtray? I don't know, but I like it. It's the only one, and it just sort of sits there. Um, I don't know why, but I like it. Here's a sort of you see the space where we're missing 2 trees. But the trees are all relatively the same height. I mean, same size. At some point, it seems care was given to ensure they didn't head in the wrong direction or get too wide. I'm not sure that attention's been given in a while, but for a while it seems like it was. Here we go. Finally, in 2007, they started talking about uh, doing feasibility studies on refurbishing or redoing Cathedral Square. And here's one of the drawings from the feasibility study. But they would open back up Westminster so that it went all the way through, and do a lot of upgrades. Of course, the money has not been there yet. They would, yeah. My hope is if that ever happens, that that our little outdoor room, the one little IMP touch that I think worked, is quite charming, could stay somehow, and I would definitely advocate for that. So that's it. My little favorite, one of my favorite parts of the city, created by one of my architect who is not among my favorite. So thank you, and we'll see you next time if I ever get up the courage to try this again. Thanks.